One patch on a sleeve can decide whether you give an order or die because you followed one. The U.S. Army has 25 official ranks. Every one of them was carved out of somebody's failure on a battlefield. One rank took over 100 years to invent. Another has only ever been worn by 5 men in American history, and by law, one of them still outranks all of them, and has been dead since 1799. The United States Army was born in 1775, before the country that owns it even existed, and from day one it needed a chain of command or it was going to fall apart. Today that chain has 3 completely separate worlds stacked on top of each other. Enlisted soldiers, who do the fighting and run the machine day to day. Warrant officers, the technical specialists nobody else in the Army can replace. And commissioned officers, who plan the wars and answer for them. 25 ranks. 3 worlds. 1 uniform. Here's every single one, from the bottom of the pile to the 5 men who ever stood above it. There is 1 rank in the entire United States Army that doesn't get an insignia. Nothing. No stripe, no patch, no chevron. A brand new soldier walks into basic combat training as an E1, private, and for roughly the first 6 months of their career, their collar is blank. It's not an accident. It's a message. You haven't earned anything yet. Around 80,000 recruits ship out to places like Fort Moore, Georgia, or Fort Jackson, South Carolina, every year, and every one of them starts here, at rock bottom, making around $2,150 a month in 2026 base pay. Drill sergeants call E1s the lowest form of life in the military, not because it's true, but because breaking down a civilian mindset in 10 weeks requires exactly that kind of shock. Push-ups in the mud at 4 a.m. sleep deprivation measured in single-digit hours. Screaming that isn't really about the mistake you just made. It's about training your nervous system to obey instantly, without negotiation, because in combat there is no time to debate an order. Almost every soldier who has ever worn the uniform, from 4-star generals to Medal of Honor recipients, started exactly here, faceless and rankless, and that's the whole point. It's the great equalizer of the U.S. Army. Retention hook, but that blank collar doesn't stay blank for long, and the next promotion happens almost automatically, whether you're ready for it or not. Roughly 6 months in, if a soldier hasn't screwed up badly enough to get held back, they're automatically promoted to E2, private. Yes, still called private. The insignia changes, a single chevron, but the title barely does. It's almost a formality, a pay bump to around $2,400 a month. Proof you survived basic. 9 to 12 months after that comes E3, private first class, 2 chevrons, the first rank where a soldier might actually be trusted to informally lead 1 or 2 brand new privates through a task. This is where soldiers finish advanced individual training and get dropped into their first real unit, the place they'll actually go to war from. It's also where reality hits. Basic training was theater, hard, brutal theater, but theater with an end date. AIT and the first unit are where a private discovers the Army isn't a movie. It's paperwork, motor pool maintenance, guard duty in freezing rain, and long stretches of boredom violently interrupted by moments that matter enormously. By the time a soldier pins on PFC, they've usually already met the person who will define the next chapter of their career, and it isn't an officer. It's a sergeant. Here's where it gets strange. E4 is the only pay grade in the entire U.S. Army that splits into 2 completely different ranks depending on the soldier's job. Combat arms soldiers, infantry, armor, artillery, the people whose entire job is direct combat, become corporals. Everyone else, from mechanics to intelligence analysts to combat medics, becomes a specialist. Same pay, around $2,900 to $3,200 a month depending on time in service. Same pay grade. Completely different meaning. A corporal is technically the first rank in the non-commissioned officer corps, the NCO chain, the backbone of the entire Army. A specialist is not. Corporals can be put in charge of a small team, a fire team of 3 or 4 soldiers, and they're expected to lead under fire if it comes to that. It's a rank that historically has been treated almost like a rite of passage into real leadership, and in some units it's genuinely rare. Soldiers often skip straight from private first class to sergeant without ever wearing corporal stripes at all, because the promotion boards value it as an NCO rank, not just a pay grade. Specialist, by contrast, is one of the most common ranks in the entire Army. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers wear it at any given time, doing the technical, support, and specialized jobs that keep a modern military machine running. Retention hook, and this is where the Army quietly starts separating soldiers into two very different futures. But the real transformation hasn't even started yet. If E4 is a fork in the road, E5 is where the road disappears and a completely different job begins. Sergeant is the first rank where a soldier stops being managed and starts managing. A brand new sergeant, often only 3 to 5 years into their career, can suddenly be handed direct responsibility for the lives of 3 to 12 other soldiers, a squad. Not administrative oversight. Actual, physical, moral responsibility. If a private under a sergeant's command dies from a preventable mistake, that sergeant carries it, professionally and personally, for the rest of their career. Sergeants make around $3,300 to $3,700 a month, and the number on the paycheck massively undersells the weight of the job. This is the rank where soldiers stop being told what right looks like and start being the ones who decide it, in real time, under pressure, for people younger and less experienced than themselves. There's a saying passed down in Army culture for generations. Officers command, but sergeants run the Army. It sounds like a t-shirt slogan. It's not. It's structurally true. A brand new second lieutenant, fresh out of West Point or ROTC, will be formally in command of a platoon, but the platoon sergeant, an experienced E6 or E7, is the one who actually keeps that platoon alive while the lieutenant learns the job. That relationship, the green officer and the seasoned NCO, is one of the oldest and most important dynamics in the entire United States military. Recap bridge so far, we've climbed from a blank collar with no rank at all, through the split between specialist and corporal, to sergeant, the first rank where a soldier's decisions can decide who lives. From here, every step up gets heavier. Staff sergeant usually arrives somewhere between 6 and 10 years into a career, and it's the point where the Army stops trusting a soldier with just people and starts trusting them with systems. A staff sergeant typically leads a squad directly, but they're also the rank most often responsible for training the sergeants below them, meaning a staff sergeant isn't just leading soldiers. They're building the next generation of leaders who will one day lead soldiers of their own. Pay climbs to roughly $3,600 to $4,300 a month. This is also, statistically, one of the harder ranks to make in the modern Army. Promotion boards get more competitive at every step up the NCO ladder, and by staff sergeant, soldiers are competing against peers who all have similar time in service and similar records. The difference between getting promoted and getting passed over often comes down to fractions of a point on a promotion board score sheet, built from things like physical fitness scores, weapons qualification, military schooling, and how a soldier performs in a formal promotion board interview where senior NCOs grill them on Army knowledge, tactics, and leadership scenarios. By sergeant first class, usually reached around 10 to 15 years in, a soldier isn't leading a squad anymore. They're often serving as a platoon sergeant, the senior enlisted advisor to a lieutenant who, statistically, has far less real-world experience than they do. This is one of the most quietly powerful relationships in the entire military. The lieutenant holds the formal authority. The sergeant first class holds the actual knowledge of how to keep 40 soldiers alive, fed, equipped, and functioning. Smart lieutenants learn fast, listen to your platoon sergeant, or watch your career end early. Pay reaches roughly $4,200 to $5,200 a month. Sergeants first class are also frequently the ones assigned to the most demanding training pipelines the Army offers: Ranger School, Special Forces Selection, Drill Sergeant duty. Because by this point in a career, the Army has identified who its best operators are, and it starts investing heavily in them. Retention hook, but even Sergeant First Class isn't the ceiling for enlisted leadership. The next step up splits the enlisted world into two entirely different power structures, and it's one of the most confusing parts of the whole rank system. At E8, the Army does the same trick it did at E4, except the stakes are dramatically higher. A soldier promoted to E8 becomes either a master sergeant or a first sergeant, and the choice defines the rest of their career. A master sergeant stays on the technical and staff track. They're often the senior enlisted expert advising commanders on their specific job field, whether that's logistics, intelligence, or communications. A first sergeant takes a completely different path. They become the top enlisted leader of an entire company, typically 60 to 200 soldiers, and they are, without exaggeration, the most feared and respected person most junior soldiers will ever interact with directly. The first sergeant, soldiers call them top, handles discipline, welfare, standards, and morale for the entire company. Officers command the company on paper. The first sergeant runs it in practice. Pay for E8s runs roughly $5,400 to $6,600 a month. Making first sergeant isn't just a promotion, it's a reselection. Soldiers have to specifically volunteer and be chosen for the first sergeant course, because leading an entire company of soldiers, some of whom are old enough to be your child and some old enough to be your parent, requires a completely different skill set than leading a 12-person squad. Sergeant Major is the highest rank a soldier can hold without ever having to accept a commission as an officer, and reaching it is genuinely rare. Fewer than 1 to 2% of enlisted soldiers ever wear this rank. It typically takes 20+ years of nearly flawless service, and the promotion rate at this level can be brutally low, sometimes in the single digits percentage-wise, depending on the year and the career field. A sergeant major or command sergeant major serves as the senior enlisted advisor to a battalion, brigade, or even higher-level commander. A full colonel or general will often lean on their command sergeant major more heavily than on any other single advisor they have, because that sergeant major has usually spent 30 years doing every single job below them and knows, from the ground up, exactly what will and won't work. Pay reaches roughly $6,700 to over $9,000 a month at the top end. And then there's one sergeant major job that stands above every other enlisted position in the entire United States Army: Sergeant Major of the Army. There is only one at any given time. This single person serves as the senior enlisted advisor to the Army Chief of Staff and, effectively, to the Secretary of the Army, the voice of every single enlisted soldier in the entire force, funneled through one human being. Recap bridge: that's the entire enlisted world, from a blank collar to the single Sergeant Major of the Army. Millions of soldiers have worn these 9 ranks combined. But there's a completely separate branch of the Army most civilians have never even heard of, and it doesn't fit the pattern at all. Warrant officers occupy a strange, fascinating space that most people, including plenty of soldiers, don't fully understand. They're not enlisted. They're not quite regular commissioned officers either. They're technical specialists, often described as the single-track experts of the Army, people who get selected specifically because they're masters of one highly technical skill and the Army wants them focused on nothing else for the rest of their career. The most famous example: helicopter pilots. A huge percentage of Army helicopter pilots are warrant officers, not commissioned officers, because flying an Apache attack helicopter or a Black Hawk in combat requires thousands of hours of focused technical mastery, not the broader leadership and command track that regular officers follow. There are 5 warrant officer ranks: WO1, then Chief Warrant Officer 2 through 5. A soldier typically becomes a warrant officer after already serving years as an enlisted NCO, bringing real operational experience into a role that then trains them into a narrow, elite technical specialty: cyber operations, criminal investigations, intelligence, aviation maintenance, and yes, flying multimillion-dollar aircraft into combat zones. Pay ranges from roughly $4,300 a month at WO1 up to $9,000 plus a month for a senior CW5 with decades of experience. Warrant officers are proof that the Army's rank structure isn't just about who gives orders. It's also built to protect and reward pure, deep technical mastery. Now the world flips entirely. Commissioned officers start over from zero in terms of practical experience, even though they enter with more formal education and, usually, significantly more pay than an enlisted soldier of similar age. A second lieutenant starts around $3,900 to $4,500 a month. Officers become officers through one of 3 paths: the United States Military Academy at West Point, Reserve Officer Training Corps at civilian universities, or Officer Candidate School for prior enlisted soldiers or college graduates. A brand new second lieutenant, nicknamed, half affectionately, half mockingly, a butter bar because of the single gold bar insignia, is typically put in command of a platoon of roughly 16 to 44 soldiers almost immediately, despite having, in many cases, 0 real-world leadership experience. This is exactly why the platoon-sergeant relationship we mentioned earlier exists. It's a built-in safety net. Every experienced NCO in the Army has a story about saving a green lieutenant from a career-ending, or worse, life-ending mistake in those first few months. It's practically a rite of passage baked into the entire system. Retention hook, but the gap between a lieutenant and a battle-hardened sergeant is nothing compared to what happens when officers start climbing toward actual command of hundreds, then thousands, of human lives. After roughly 18 to 24 months, most second lieutenants are promoted to first lieutenant, O2, making around $4,500 to $5,200 a month, often nearly automatic if they haven't been flagged for performance issues. It's captain, O3, where things get genuinely serious. Reached around 4 years into a commissioned career, a captain typically commands an entire company. The same 60 to 200 soldiers a first sergeant helps run. And for the first time, an officer is truly, legally, formally in command, not just nominally. Captain pay runs roughly $5,700 to $7,900 a month. This is widely considered the make-or-break rank for an officer's entire career. Command time as a captain is scrutinized intensely by promotion boards. A strong company command can launch an officer toward battalion and brigade command years later, while a rocky one can quietly end an officer's realistic chances of ever making general. It's also the rank where the officer-NCO partnership is tested hardest, because a captain in command of a company is paired directly with that company's first sergeant, and how well that specific relationship functions can genuinely determine whether soldiers under their command come home safely. After roughly 18 to 24 months, most second lieutenants are promoted to first lieutenant, O2, making around $4,500 to $5,200 a month, often nearly automatic if they haven't been flagged for performance issues. It's captain, O3, where things get genuinely serious. Reached around 4 years into a commissioned career, a captain typically commands an entire company. The same 60 to 200 soldiers a first sergeant helps run. And for the first time, an officer is truly, legally, formally in command, not just nominally. Captain pay runs roughly $5,700 to $7,900 a month. This is widely considered the make-or-break rank for an officer's entire career. Command time as a captain is scrutinized intensely by promotion boards. A strong company command can launch an officer toward battalion and brigade command years later, while a rocky one can quietly end an officer's realistic chances of ever making general. It's also the rank where the officer-NCO partnership is tested hardest, because a captain in command of a company is paired directly with that company's first sergeant, and how well that specific relationship functions can genuinely determine whether soldiers under their command come home safely. This is where the Army starts thinning the herd dramatically. Major, O4, typically arrives around 10 years in, with pay around $6,600 to $9,300 a month, and it's largely a staff rank. Majors plan operations, manage logistics for entire battalions, and serve as the operational brains behind the commanders above them. Lieutenant Colonel, O5, usually reached around 16 to 20 years in, is where an officer, if selected, takes command of an entire battalion, anywhere from 300 to over 1,000 soldiers. Pay climbs to roughly $7,700 to over $11,000 a month. Here's the number that should stop you. By the time officers reach Lieutenant Colonel, the Army has typically already forced out or passed over a majority of their original commissioning class. Some year groups see attrition and non-selection rates that mean fewer than half, sometimes far fewer, ever wear this rank. Every single promotion from here upward gets exponentially more competitive, and it isn't just about performance anymore. It's about which officers the Army's senior leadership specifically believes could, someday, be trusted with the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers and decisions that could start or end wars. Recap bridge. We've now covered every rank from a blank-collared private to a lieutenant colonel commanding over 1,000 troops. And statistically, almost nobody who starts at the bottom will ever see what comes next. What's left is genuinely rare air. Colonel, O6, is where an officer, if they've survived every filter the Army has thrown at them for close to 2 decades, can take command of an entire brigade, 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers, sometimes more. Pay reaches roughly $9,000 to over $13,000 a month. A colonel commanding a brigade holds authority most civilians can barely comprehend. The ability to direct thousands of soldiers, control enormous budgets, and, in combat, make decisions with life or death consequences at a scale a company or battalion commander never has to face. Colonel is also, brutally, the rank where the vast majority of officer careers permanently plateau. Only a small fraction of colonels will ever be selected for the next step, because above colonel, everything changes. The next rank isn't just a promotion, it's Senate confirmation. Every single general officer in the United States Army, from 1 star to 5, must be nominated by the President and confirmed by the United States Senate. At that point, promotion stops being purely a military decision. It becomes a political one too. Here's where it gets almost unbelievable. Brigadier General, 07, 1 star, typically commands a division-level staff element or a smaller specialized formation, with pay around $11,900 to $15,300 a month. Major General, 08, 2 stars, commands an entire division, 10,000 to 15,000 soldiers. Lieutenant General, 09, 3 stars, commands a corps, potentially 20,000 to 45,000 troops, or holds a senior Pentagon staff position shaping national military strategy. And General, 010, 4 stars, sits at the absolute top of the active rank structure, commanding entire theaters of war, serving as the Army Chief of Staff, or leading unified combatant commands that control every branch of the U.S. military in an entire region of the world, from the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific. Fewer than a couple hundred of these officers exist across the entire active force at any given time, out of an army of hundreds of thousands. Pay for a 4-star general tops out around $17,600 to $19,000 plus a month. But there is one rank above even that, and it's where this story turns almost unbelievable. General of the Army, 5 stars, was created only twice in American history, both times during global war, because the United States needed its top commanders to formally outrank equivalent 5-star officers from Britain and other allied nations at negotiating tables where lives and borders were on the line. Only 5 men in all of American history have ever held it: George Marshall, Douglas MacArthur, Dwight Eisenhower, Henry Hap Arnold, and Omar Bradley, the last man ever promoted to it, in 1950. No one has worn 5 stars since. Legally, the rank still exists on paper. Practically, it has been retired by circumstance for over 70 years, because the wars that justified inventing it haven't happened again, at least not yet. But here's the twist almost nobody knows, the one that turns this entire hierarchy upside down. In 1976, for the American bicentennial, Congress created a rank higher than 5 stars, General of the Armies of the United States, and posthumously awarded it to exactly one man, George Washington. The law was written specifically to guarantee that Washington would permanently outrank every officer who has ever lived or ever will, including Marshall, MacArthur, and Eisenhower, including every future 5-star general the country might one day be forced to create in the next World War. 227 years after his death, the founding father who commanded a starving, freezing, barely-clothed army against the most powerful military on earth still, by federal law, sits at the very top of the American rank structure. Every private, every sergeant major, every 4-star general who has ever raised their right hand and taken the oath, technically, on paper, still salutes him. 25 ranks. Millions of soldiers. And at the absolute top of a system built on discipline, competition, and decades of earned authority sits a man who's been dead since before the rank even existed. Rank in the U.S. Army was never really about who's alive to enforce it. It's about who earned the right to be remembered above everyone who came after them. If the idea that George Washington still technically outranks every living American general blew your mind, wait until you see what it actually takes to become one of the roughly 200 4-star generals alive today. That's the next video. Drop a comment. Which rank do you think is the hardest to earn? Sergeant Major or Colonel? And if you haven't already, subscribe. The Paint It breaks down the darkest, wildest, most surprising true stories in history and the military, one doodle at a time.